this is Martin Popoff. We're at the Global Black Sabbath Convention in New York. I flew down from Toronto. We got piles of books here for sale and hanging out with ProsperoRocks. Been hearing the story of all the videos and stuff. It's amazing the history being recorded for all of posterity here. And it's a very good quality situation. And glad to hear that there's interviews happening as well. So yeah, very cool situation. Love meeting all you guys and a lot of friends and stuff. It's been a really cool time at this convention.
Where are you going to be tomorrow night?
Not sure, you know, there's a Black Sabbath concert tomorrow night, but I don't know if I'm going to be there because I have this problem with feeling guilty about being entertained. So I don't really feel like I have to go to this thing. I may, although all the art galleries are closed, so I can't go to the art galleries. I went to the Whitney today, I went to the Morgan yesterday, I'm going to go to the MoMA tomorrow. So I'm not sure, To me, I love just watching concerts on YouTube, which is, I guess, what ProsperoRocks.com does all the time. So, yeah, there's quite a library of that stuff there. So, not sure. Maybe all you guys will be at the Sabbath concert. Maybe I won't.
Sounds good. Thanks, Martin.
Antique label. And Sabbath's on there. And that Black Sabbath album is basically, back then they used the term underground music, but you could almost call that a hard progressive rock album. It's very jammy. It's got long songs and all those songs broken up into little pieces. That's a whole other story. That has to do with publishing, I think, in the States. But so anyway, so the reason I went to 1971 is this idea of intention and wanting to do it on purpose. And what you get is that if the story stopped in 1970, I would almost say Deep Purple, even though it's later than the first Black Sabbath album, did it much more impressively, the invention of heavy metal. But what happens in 1971 is Deep Purple goes back into their, you know, wishy-washy 70s variety ways and puts out Fireball, which has got all sorts of weird stuff, even like a jokey country tune on it. But what does Black Sabbath do? They really make a heavy album. I mean, Master of Reality is just this bruising, new, modern, and even all those riffs on that album are even better than the riffs Ritchie Blackmore was coming up with, and even more modern. It was even a greater leap into the 70s. So what I did with this book is basically decide that, you know, Black Sabbath invented heavy metal, and then they underscored it with what they did on Master of Reality. The production on that, the down-tuning, those crushing heavy riffs, and the fact that I think the blues is taken completely out of it. And just to close on that note, I mean, I think a lot of people, I have had a lot of debates with people who think there's a lot of blues in Black Sabbath. I don't care if Tony Iommi even believes that. I would argue to the death with Tony about this whole thing. And Bill Ward saying, oh, we were a jazzy band, and Bill Ward was a slightly jazzy drummer, but I don't think they're a very jazzy band, except for maybe that first record, because of some of those long things. But to me, the only blues left in Black Sabbath at all throughout their entire catalog is literally the one song that is a cover on the first album, which isn't even a blues. The Warning is more like a, it's more like a blues-inflected dirge. A little bit in Tony Iommi's soloing style, but when you get to soloing style, that's kind of an abstract thing, and I don't really believe that's really a bluesy trademark per se. I mean, to me, I equate blues with all those rules that are equated with like rock and roll and boogie woogie. So to me, the next time Black Sabbath has any blues is Rock and Roll Doctor on Technical Ecstasy with the honky tonk piano and just the slight boogie chord progression there. And then I think there's a blues, I can't remember the name. Is it Hard Like a Wheel? There's a bluesy song on Seventh Star, right? I almost close to a true blues, but this is why I think, you know, if you survey that whole catalog, this band is not bluesy in any respect. I don't think. So that's it. So those are the reasons I think Black Sabbath invented heavy. I'd talk for another half hour, but I think my time is up. I would fill in a lot of those blanks. There's a lot of stuff on the 60s and that, but I'll leave it there. And if anybody's got any questions or whatever about anything, the Sabbath books or any of the other books or even Banger Films, I don't care. Let me know.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Sure.
Hey, how did some of the bands like like the early Grateful Dead, how did they fit in to some of the songwritings? you know, for Black Sabbath.
Grateful Dead?
Yeah.
Where would they fit in the invention of metal and whatnot?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, because it was happening then. You know, it was big time happening then. It
Yeah.
had to have been an influence. So I'm just wondering, you know.
Yeah, you know, I don't know if I've never really heard that Grateful Dead was much of an influence. I mean, I think their biggest influence definitely comes from the British blues boom situation. We know from those early things we can see on YouTube, those early shows, that they were definitely a British blues boom band. I mean, Grateful Dead's an interesting band. I love the Dead. I don't see them at all in the metal story, but they do have a darkness to them, and they were a guitar band, and they were early on. I mean, you know, my book goes into a lot of the garage bands as well. There's a lot of Sonics and Louie Louie's an important song, and there's you know, even that garage stuff they actually even used to call punk rock a little bit back then. It's funny, I mean, punk's a whole nother thing, but Alice Cooper and Rick Derringer and any sweaty looking guy in a circus magazine in 1974 with a guitar could be called a punk. At those various times. And the whole history of the term heavy metal is very, very interesting as well. But we know that doesn't really start taking off. The first mentioned 71, it picks up in 73, it's really going by about 75. But there's reasons, I mean, none of these bands call themselves heavy metal bands. It really doesn't exist. You know, I thought Bill Ward had a funny one where he talks them, where he says we're a downers and wine band. I thought that was really cool, calling Sabbath, because there was a lot of downers and wine being done. It was there were certain drugs of choice for some of these bands that didn't play well with other ones.
Terminals, Seganals.
Yeah, right. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
Martin, what do you think about the influence of bands like Coven on Black Sabbath?
Sorry, who?
Coven?
Oh, Coven.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff on Coven in my book. I can't remember all of the connections. The book was written a little while ago, but we know Coven is of course. Coven and Black Widow are the two completely satanic bands. One of them is from the States, one of them is from Britain. Black Widow always got confused with Black Sabbath in band billings. They were actually quite a mellow band with flutes and stuff, and they were kind of proggy. They were not heavy at all, but they actually had a whole, satanic sacrifice on stage, naked ladies. Coven, I believe, did something similar. They have that album called Witchcraft Reaps Souls and Destroys Minds or something. And there's correct me if I'm wrong, because all this stuff isn't in my head, but yeah, they had a guy in the band named Oz Osbourne, right? And they had a song. Did they have a song called Black Sabbath? They did, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little crazy. So Jinx Dawson from Coven, I've interviewed her a couple times, and she really does want to take credit a little bit for some of this stuff, and she is a little bit conspiratorial in thinking that these guys knew about her and that thing. And it is kind of remarkable that all this happens right around the same time. It really is about the same time, and I don't know how much cross-pollination there really is there, but it is fascinating, the Coven story. And they're also not at all a heavy band, so no one else was combining that scary stuff with. And I'll just make one more point about that. I remember the reason I put pictures of there are no pictures in this book of mine except for a lot of ads, and there's a lot of cool Sabbath ads and stuff, and there's a lot of neat text about making heavy music. And the reason I put there's only two pictures in the whole book, and it's a picture of Geezer and a picture of Tony. And the reason I put those two guys, Tony, for obvious reasons, he's the riff master, he invented heavy metal, really, if you had to pin it on one guy. But the reason I put Geezer in is that and Jim kind of gets the timeline very compressed and it's hard to tell, but it sounds like basically Geezer coming up with scary subject matter spurred Tony on almost instantly to come up with scary riffs. And the two together started making this scary music, feeding off of each other. And Ozzy and Bill really don't have a part in that particular nugget of the story. And heavy metal, definitely another definition is it's this scary music that got invented, and it was Sabbath who did it. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Hey, thanks for driving down.
Yeah.
So
I flew.
So like Sabbath, Purple, and especially Zeppelin distance themselves from the term. Like Zeppelin won't even do anything that would remotely associate them with metal.
Yeah.
So why do you think those bands think it's such a pejorative? And the other thing is, like, where in the timeline do bands begin to reflect and look in the mirror and say, we are a heavy metal band.
Right. Yes. So Zeppelin's an interesting case. I mean, I've always thought that they are a post-British blues boom band. They do interesting things to take it away from the British blues boom, which, like I say, was boring everybody. So they have folk. They have blues, they have hard blues, they have blues that rolls into heavy metal. You know, how many more times, and even Whipping Post, are songs that you could almost say are the heavy metal end of blues. They're essentially blues songs. So Zeppelin, you're right. They distance themselves. Zeppelin is snobby, so they definitely are against it for that reason. And they also, they're probably somewhat careerist, and they don't want to be associated with any tag which will pigeonhole them in any way. And they always look down on Black Sabbath. And the Black Sabbath guys, they're very sincere and cool guys and down to earth, and they realize Zeppelin were snobby guys. So they're like the London guys, and we're the Birmingham working class guys. And basically, there was definitely a snobby level there, and I get annoyed when people say Sabbath is lesser because they did, or when people say our new album's coming out, it's got something for everyone. Well, if it's got something for everyone and there's only 3 heavy songs on it, it doesn't have enough heavy for me. Sabbath wanted to do a bunch of permutations on heavy metal for everybody, for us heavy metal fans, and to me that's not a lesser thing, having a lesser variety on your thing. You just want to perfect a certain kind of music. It's more challenging even in a way. So I forget, what was the second part of your question?
So when did bands begin to look in the mirror and say we are a heavy metal
right
band?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because who gets credited with that the most? And I've got 3 new wave of British heavy metal books over there. Only 1 copy of each that I brought down. 2 of my latest books are these things, and it's a trilogy, a timeline with quotes. And in the timeline, what happens is there's a very important moment when Judas Priest dons the leather and chains and gets the bike and does Take on the World, 1979, Hellbent for Leather. They're starting to talk about our metal tribe, and no one had ever done that before. No one had ever dressed in metal unison that way. And so they're starting to talk about metal. There's a lot of great metal songs on that. Judas Priest is really the next step past Sabbath that does anything new with Sad Wings Destiny. And by the way, there's a really cool ad in the UK newspapers that says this is the heaviest record you'll ever hear, kind of thing, and it got it dead on, because that was the next thing. So basically Priest really gets a lot of credit for the whole new wave of British heavy metal, because they're the first self-identifying band that way. And then that whole genre is about identifying with metal. You get Wheels of Steel. Every song's about bikers and metal, and we are the metal crowd, and we are a tribe, and you've got the metal uniform with the jackets and the patches and the leather and the bullet belts and all that stuff. So that's really the first time it really starts happening, where you get bands saying, yeah, we actually are not going to apologize for this music anymore. We're an army. Yeah.
So was it, when Dio was with Sabbath, was it true that he got pissed off and didn't want to open up for Ozzy?
Boy, that's an interesting one. I'll tell you one thing. Quartz, which has all sorts of, they're an obscure band that has a lot of tie-in with Sabbath. Dio was ticked off that Quartz was going to steal the show once and kick them off the thing. I'm not sure what happens there, but we talked about the new wave British heavy metal, and the interesting thing about Dio, I did an article for Goldmine recently, which was honorary new wave of British heavy metal bands, and I argue that Sabbath, because they get this renovation, and they're right in there with Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules, and the Ozzy Osbourne band, which is a new band. They both are honorary new wave of British heavy metal bands, and I firmly believe that neither of those bands would have took off the way they did again and have that second life if it wasn't for a metal army being there and causing all this excitement around them. Ronnie joining that band might have been just another footnote, and here's an album that sells 300,000 in the States and stalls, and then the next one doesn't do well and they lose their deal or whatever. So it really is a lot of credit to the new wave British heavy metal that boomeranged a few of these bands forward to do some cool heavy stuff. Budgie, Uriah Heep, even Wishbone Ash. I can picture those album covers where they made heavy metal album covers, but the albums weren't that heavy. So anything else? Yes?
When you talked about the early days, like in the mid-50s, and you mentioned Train Kept Rolling, were you referring to the Johnny Burnett Trio, or was there another band?
No, that's the one. Sorry if I didn't say that. The song was written 3 years earlier, and then he did it. And then his is a pretty wacky, heavy version with some pretty good wailing and screaming. And, you know, I compare that song to the Yardbirds version in '64, and it's actually not even that much mellower than the Yardbirds version. So there's a lot of cool little heavy metal touchstones of that. So anything else? I believe my time's up and we need to move on this story, but one more question at all? No? Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
That's good. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing what you're doing. I love this. It's beautiful. I mean, this is really a symposium, and that's really what we wanted to envision as we did. So, yeah, let's get a picture. This is great. Imported from Canada. Who could have asked?